Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The late afternoon sun cast long orange beams through the kitchen window as Marshall Kane pulled into the driveway of his suburban Portland home. His shoulders ached from a 10-hour day, hunched over a custom dining table at his woodworking shop. Sawdust still clung to the creases in his hands despite his thorough washing. Marshall cut the engine and sat for a moment, noting Alira's car parked at an odd angle. Bryn's sleek convertible, the one he'd paid for, was parked beside it. Something in his gut tightened. Both of them home at once usually meant trouble. He pushed open the front door, carrying a small wooden jewelry box he'd finished for Alira. A peace offering, though he wasn't sure what he was making peace for. "About time you showed up," Alira's voice cut through the silence. She stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, manicured nails digging into her forearms. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, her lips pressed into a thin line. Marshall set his keys on the entry table. "Had to finish the Miller's table. Promised delivery by tomorrow, right? Your precious workshop. Your precious clients. Always your priority." Alira's voice rose with each word. Marshall sighed, setting the jewelry box on the table. "Alira, those clients pay our mortgage. Don't you dare act like you're doing me a favor." Alira's voice escalated to a shout. 20 years, Marshall. 20 years I've put up with your emotional distance. Your control. Your mom's right." Bryn appeared at the top of the stairs, her slim figure leaning against the banister. At 20, she had Alira's sharp features and commanding presence. "You're never here, and when you are, you barely speak." Marshall looked up at his daughter, noting how she smirked down at him. "This doesn't involve you, Bryn." "Of course it does." Bryn descended the stairs, each step deliberate. "This affects all of us. Mom's been carrying this family emotionally while you hide in your little workshop." Marshall kept his expression neutral, though he felt something breaking inside. Bryn had always sided with Alira, but the contempt in her voice was new. "You should hear how she cries," Bryn continued, positioning herself beside Alira. "But you wouldn't know about that, would you? Too busy with your precious wood." Alira seemed to gain strength from Bryn's presence. "You think providing financially is enough? You're an empty shell, Marshall, a walking ATM. I need a husband, not a roommate who grunts and disappears." Marshall stood perfectly still, his face betraying nothing of the turmoil inside. Years of Marine training had taught him to keep calm under fire. "Nothing to say," Bryn taunted. "Typical. Mom and I talk about everything. She tells me things you wouldn't believe." She exchanged a knowing glance with Alira, and something in that look made Marshall's blood run cold. Alira stepped forward, her finger jabbing the air. "You're pathetic. You think your silence makes you strong? It makes you nothing." Her voice rose to a scream. "You're ungrateful. Get out and never come back." The house fell silent. Marshall looked from his wife to his daughter, noting how they stood together, a united front against him. 20 years of marriage. 20 years of providing, protecting, loving in the only way he knew how. Without a word, Marshall picked up his keys. He left the jewelry box on the table, turned, and walked out the door. He didn't slam it. He closed it gently behind him, climbed into his truck, and drove away. In his rearview mirror, he could see them watching from the window. They were probably waiting for him to break down, to come back begging, to give them the emotional explosion they wanted. They would be waiting a long time. The cabin sat nestled among towering Douglas firs, a half-mile from the nearest neighbor. Marshall's grandfather had built it with his own hands in the 1950s, a testament to self-reliance that had shaped Marshall's childhood. The old man had raised him here after his parents died, teaching him how to split wood, hunt deer, and face life's hardships without complaint. Marshall parked his truck beside the weathered porch and sat looking at the cabin. He hadn't been here in months, too busy with the shop, with trying to please Alira with more money, more things, more of what she said she wanted. The key still hung where his grandfather had always kept it, on a nail hidden under the eave. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and old memories. Marshall flipped the breaker switch, and a single overhead light illuminated the sparse furnishings of a worn leather couch, A simple wooden table with 4 chairs, a cast iron stove. He built a fire in the stove from the stockpile of wood on the back porch. As flames licked the seasoned oak, Marshall sat on the couch and let his mind drift back. He'd met Elira when he was 33, fresh out of the Marines and raw from his grandfather's death. The woodworking shop was new then, and he was working 18-hour days to keep it afloat. Elira had walked in looking for a custom bookshelf. He remembered how she'd touched the grain of an ash coffee table he'd just finished, her fingers tracing the lines with appreciation. "You have an artist's hands," she'd told him, and no one had ever called him an artist before. In the Marines, he was valued for his precision, his discipline, his ability to follow orders without question. His grandfather had praised his work ethic, his resilience, his quiet determination, but never his artistry. Elira had filled the silent spaces in his life with color and sound. Her laughter, her opinions, her endless energy had been intoxicating. When she told him she was pregnant just 6 months after they met, he'd proposed immediately. Bryn was born 3 months later, a bit early, the doctors said. Marshall never questioned it. Now, sitting in his grandfather's cabin with the weight of truth pressing down on him, Marshall faced what he'd suspected for years, but refused to acknowledge. The life he'd built was a facade. The family he'd sacrificed for was not his own. The fire crackled, and Marshall got up to add another log. He moved with the economical precision that defined everything. He did no wasted motion, no unnecessary steps. In the small bedroom, he found his grandfather's old footlocker. Inside were clothes that still fit him, a few books, and a leather-bound journal he'd kept during his first year as a civilian. Marshall opened the journal to a random page. Elira asked why I don't talk about the war. I tried to explain that some things aren't meant to be pulled into the light. She says I'm shutting her out. Maybe I am, but some doors are better left closed. He closed the journal and placed it back in the footlocker. There would be time for reflection later. Now he needed a plan. Marshall took out his phone and made 3 calls to his bank, to a private investigator he'd used for background checks on potential business partners, and to an attorney who specialized in divorce. None of the calls lasted more than 5 minutes. Marshall didn't believe in wasting words. When he was done, he went to the porch and looked up at the stars, visible here away from the city lights. His grandfather used to say that a man's character was defined not by how he acted when things were good, but by how he responded when the world showed its teeth. The world was showing its teeth now. Marshall would respond, as he always had, with quiet resolve and methodical action. Not with rage, not with pleading, but with the cold, inexorable force of truth. 3 weeks passed before Marshall heard from either of them. The notification came while he was in the middle of carving an intricate headboard for a client. Need to talk. Why did you stop paying tuition? I have bills. Mom says you're being petty. Marshall read Bryn's text twice, then set down his chisel and called his attorney. Is everything in order? All set, Mr. Kane. Curtis Delane's voice was crisp and professional. The filing was accepted by the court yesterday. I have a complete package ready, as you requested. I'll pick it up in an hour. The law offices of Delane and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a modest office building in downtown Portland. Curtis Delane, a trim man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, handed Marshall a heavy black folder and a USB drive. It's all there, Delane said. The DNA results are conclusive. The surveillance footage is time-stamped and authenticated. The financial documentation is ironclad. He paused. Are you sure you want to do it this way? Most clients prefer to let us handle the notification process. Marshall took the folder. Some messages need to be delivered in person. He drove to a quiet parking lot behind a strip mall on the edge of town. It was neutral ground, public, but private enough for what needed to be said. He texted Bryn his location and waited. Her convertible pulled in 20 minutes later. She got out, wearing expensive jeans and a cashmere sweater Marshall recognized he'd given it to her for Christmas. Her expression was a mixture of annoyance and entitlement as she approached his truck. This is ridiculous, she said, sliding into the passenger seat. Mom's freaking out. You can't just cut off my tuition in the middle of the semester. What am I supposed to tell the financial aid office? Marshall looked at her. She had Elira's eyes, her nose, her chin. Nothing of him. How had he never seen it? Without a word, he handed her the black folder and a USB drive. What's this? Bryn's voice held a note of uncertainty for the first time. The truth, Marshall said. Bryn opened the folder. On top was a DNA paternity test result. Marshall watched as her eyes moved over the document, widening as she reached the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 0%. This is fake, she said, but her voice wavered. You made this up because you're mad at Mom. Keep reading, Marshall said. Beneath the DNA test were divorce papers. Marshall Kane versus Elira Kane, citing infidelity and fraud. Already filed with the county clerk. This is insane. Bryn's voice rose. You can't do this to us. There's more. Bryn pulled out financial statements, phone records, and finally, a transcript of recorded conversations between Elira and a man named Kenny Voss spanning the last 5 years. Her hands began to shake. The USB has video, Marshall said quietly. Bryn fumbled with her phone, inserted the USB using an adapter, and tapped the first video file. The screen showed Elira and a tall, dark-haired man embracing in what appeared to be a hotel room. The timestamp showed a date just 3 months ago. Turn up the sound, Marshall said. Reluctantly, Bryn obeyed. Elira's voice came through clearly. Marshall's working late again. Probably won't be home until midnight. We have plenty of time. Bryn stopped the video, her face flushed. I don't want to see this. Try the one from February 12th, Marshall suggested, his voice devoid of emotion. You're in that one. Bryn's fingers trembled as she found the file. The video showed the front of Marshall and Elira's house. Bryn could be seen opening the front door, looking around furtively, then waving to someone off camera. A moment later, Kenny Voss hurried up the walk. Bryn greeted him with a hug, then pointed toward the upstairs. They both laughed before disappearing inside. The video continued for a moment longer, capturing Bryn and Kenny's voices. Dad's at some lumber auction. Won't be back until tomorrow. Your mom ready for me, waiting upstairs. I told her I'd play lookout. The video ended. Bryn stared at the blank screen, then at Marshall. Her face had drained of color. You spied on us, she whispered. I protected myself, Marshall corrected. For years, I believed what I was told. I trusted you both. That was my mistake. It's not what it looks like, Bryn started, but the defense sounded hollow, even to her ears. It's exactly what it looks like, Marshall said. Kenny Voss is your biological father. He and your mother have been involved off and on since before you were born, and you've been helping them hide it. I didn't know he was my father, Bryn said quickly. Mom never told me that part, but you knew the rest. Marshall's voice was flat. You helped her lie to me. You watched me work 60-hour weeks to pay for your education, your car, your lifestyle, all while laughing behind my back. Bryn's defiance crumbled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. What happens now? Now you know why the tuition payment stopped, Marshall said. You're not my daughter. You're Kenny's problem. Marshall, please. I provided for you for 20 years, believing you were mine. That ends today. Bryn's tears turned to sobs. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? Marshall started the engine. That's not my concern anymore. You can't just throw me away. Bryn's voice broke. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Marshall looked at her one last time. You helped her bury the knife. You don't get to play the victim now. You start from zero. Same as me. Bryn gathered the folder and USB with shaking hands and got out of the truck. Marshall watched in the rearview mirror as she stood in the parking lot, clutching the evidence of her betrayal before he drove away. The dormitory room felt claustrophobic. Bryn sat on her bed, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on lies. The black folder lay open beside her, its contents spread across the comforter like an accusation. For the third time, she called her mother. For the third time, the call went to voicemail. Mom, please call me back. I talked to Marshall. He knows everything. He has evidence. Videos. He showed me. Her voice broke. Just call me, please. She hung up and stared at the phone. Part of her wanted to hurl against the wall, to scream until her throat was raw. Another part, the part that had been raised on her mother's lessons in manipulation, was already calculating angles, drafting explanations, looking for an escape route. But the images on the USB drive couldn't be explained away. The timestamps couldn't be denied. The DNA test couldn't be disputed. Marshall Kane was not her father. The thought struck her with physical force. The man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had built her a dollhouse with working lights, who had never missed a school play or a parent-teacher conference, that man was not her father, and she had helped betray him. Bryn remembered the night captured on video. She'd been home from college for the weekend. Her mother had called Kenny, telling him Marshall would be gone overnight. Bryn had agreed to keep watch, to warn them if Marshall returned early. "Your dad doesn't understand me," Alira had told her countless times over the years. "He's cold, distant. Kenny makes me feel alive." Bryn had believed it, or wanted to. It was easier to side with her vivacious, emotional mother than with her quiet, stoic father. Easier to blame his reserve than to question her mother's constant dissatisfaction. Now, looking at the evidence Marshall had gathered, Bryn saw the pattern. Kenny Voss had been a presence in their lives for as long as she could remember. Family friend, business associate, her mother's shoulder to cry on. All a carefully constructed fiction to allow Kenny access to his biological daughter while maintaining his marriage to someone else. And Marshall had paid for it all. Every dance lesson, every credit hour, every spring break trip funded by the man she had helped deceive. The realization hit her with a wave of nausea. Bryn barely made it to the bathroom before emptying the contents of her stomach. She sat on the cold tile floor afterward, her forehead pressed against the porcelain, and finally allowed herself to face the truth. She was not a victim. She was an accomplice. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Not from her mother, but from the university financial office. "Ms. Kane, your tuition payment for this semester has not been received. Please contact our office immediately to avoid disenrollment." Disenrollment. The word echoed in her mind. Without Marshall's financial support, she couldn't stay in school. Without a degree, her career plans collapsed. Without her carefully constructed identity as Marshall Kane's daughter, who was she? Bryn Kane didn't exist. She was Bryn Voss, daughter of a man who had never acknowledged her, never supported her, never claimed her. The dormitory walls closed in around her. She needed to see Marshall, needed to explain, to apologize, to beg if necessary. She grabbed her keys and the black folder and ran for her car. The drive to Marshall's cabin took nearly 2 hours. Bryn had been there only a handful of times over the years. Marshall's refuge, he called it. A place too boring, too rustic, too isolated for Alira and Bryn's tastes. Now it represented her only hope. The cabin looked smaller than she remembered, more weathered. Marshall's truck was parked outside, a good sign he was home. Bryn pulled up beside it and sat for a moment, rehearsing what she would say. "That I didn't know. I was manipulated too. I was just a kid." The excuses sounded hollow even in her own mind. Marshall opened the cabin door before she could knock. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He wore work clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle from decades of physical labor. "What do you want?" His voice was neutral, neither angry nor welcoming. That Bryn's carefully prepared speech evaporated. "I'm sorry," she blurted out. "I didn't know he was my real father. I swear I didn't know that part. But you knew the rest," Marshall said. "You knew your mother was unfaithful. You helped her hide it." Tears spilled down Bryn's cheeks. "I was wrong. So wrong. Please, Marshall. Dad, I can't lose you." Marshall's expression didn't change. "You never had me. Not really. You had what I provided: money, security, social standing. Now you have the truth." "That's not fair," Bryn protested. "I loved you. I still love you." "Love isn't just a feeling," Marshall said. "It's a choice. It's loyalty. It's honesty. You chose your path a long time ago." "I'll do anything," Bryn begged. "Anything to make this right. Please, just tell me what I need to do." Marshall regarded her for a long moment. "You helped her bury the knife. You don't get to play the victim now. You start from zero. Same as me." With that, he closed the door, leaving Bryn standing on the porch, her tears falling freely now. "Please," she called, pounding on the door. "Please don't do this. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" Inside, she could hear Marshall moving around, ignoring her pleas. Bryn slid down the door to sit on the porch, sobbing openly now. The carefully constructed facade she'd maintained her entire life, popular girl, good student, daddy's little princess, lay in ruins around her. She was Bryn Voss now. And Bryn Voss had nothing. "Marshall, you need to eat something." Gwen Harlow set a plate of bacon and eggs on the workbench where Marshall was sanding a rocking chair. "You've been at it since dawn." Marshall glanced up at the woman who had been his friend for nearly a decade. Gwen ran the hardware store in town, a third-generation business she'd taken over from her father. She was practical, straightforward, and had never once tried to change Marshall or criticize his reserve. "Thanks," he said, setting down his sandpaper and picking up the fork. Gwen leaned against the workbench, watching him eat. "Town's talking," she said after a moment. Marshall nodded. "Expected as much. Marla Kendricks is telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown. Says you threatened Elira, that she had to kick you out for her own safety." Marshall's jaw tightened, but he kept eating. "Kenny Voss held an impromptu town council meeting yesterday," Gwen continued. "Made a big speech about supporting victims of domestic abuse. Didn't name names, but everyone knew who he meant. Convenient narrative," Marshall said. "It's bullshit, is what it is." Gwen's eyes flashed with anger. 20 years in this town, and no one's ever seen you raise your voice, let alone your hand. But people believe what they want to believe. People believe what's easy," Marshall corrected. "The quiet husband snaps and turns violent? That's a story they understand. The respected councilman and the devoted wife carrying on a decades-long affair, concealing a child's paternity? That's complicated. Messy. So what are you going to do?" Gwen asked. "You can't let them smear your name like this." Marshall set down his empty plate. "Already doing it." He led Gwen to the small office at the back of his workshop. On the desk sat 3 cardboard boxes filled with neatly labeled files. "What is all this?" Gwen asked, picking up a folder. "Evidence," Marshall said. 20 years' worth. Gwen opened the folder to find phone records, receipts, photographs, all meticulously dated and organized. "You've been collecting this all along." Marshall shook his head. "Most of it is just normal record keeping. Business receipts, phone bills, security camera footage from the shop." He pointed to one of the boxes. "The PI gathered the rest over the last month." "You hired a private investigator?" "When?" "The night Elira kicked me out," Marshall said. "I knew something wasn't right. Had known for years, if I'm honest with myself. Just didn't want to face it." Gwen flipped through another folder, her expression growing grimmer with each page. "Marshall, this is extensive. You have recordings of Elira and Kenny planning how to get more money out of you. Texts between them going back 5 years. Photos of them together when you were supposedly on business trips." "Keep going," Marshall said. Gwen opened a third folder and gasped. "Is this what I think it is?" Marshall nodded. "DNA test. Bryn isn't mine." Gwen sat heavily in the desk chair. "Jesus, Marshall. All this time, Marshall agreed. And now they're painting me as the villain." "You need to fight back," Gwen said firmly. "Show people who the real villains are." Marshall's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He checked the screen, then answered. "Delane, what's the news?" He listened for a moment, his expression unchanging. "Good. Proceed as planned. Let me know when it's filed." He hung up and turned to Gwen. "Elira's attorney just served mine with a petition for emergency spousal support. Claims I emptied our accounts and left her destitute." "That's ridiculous," Gwen said. "Your shop is thriving. Everyone knows that." "Not the shop," Marshall corrected. "Our personal accounts. And I didn't empty them. I removed my name from the joint accounts and transferred my personal funds to new accounts in my name only. Perfectly legal. And the shop, sole proprietorship. Always has been. Elira wanted no part of it when I was starting out, said it was too risky. Her name isn't on any of the business documents." Gwen whistled. She didn't think this through, did she? "Neither did Kenny," Marshall said. "He's been embezzling from the town for years. Small amounts well hidden. But he's been using the money to fund trips with Elira." "How do you know that?" Marshall opened another folder and handed Gwen a stack of financial records. "Kenny oversees the town's recreation budget. Every fiscal quarter for the past 5 years, Between $5,000 and $10,000 has been allocated to special projects that don't exist. Gwen scanned the documents, her eyes widening. Marshall, this is explosive. If this gets out, Kenny's career is over. He could face criminal charges. I know, Marshall said quietly. So what's your next move? Marshall returned to his rocking chair, picking up the sandpaper again. Court date is next week. We let the legal system do its job first. And after that, Marshall's hands moved methodically over the wood, smoothing every imperfection. After that, the truth comes out. All of it. The courthouse steps were crowded with familiar faces when Marshall arrived. Curtis Delane met him at the entrance, briefcase in hand. Quite the turnout, Delane remarked, nodding toward the crowd. Word travels fast in small towns. Marshall scanned the faces. Elira stood near the top of the steps, surrounded by a group of women. Marla Kendricks had her arm around Elira's shoulders in a protective gesture. Elira had dressed for the occasion in a modest navy suit, her hair pulled back, her makeup subdued. The perfect image of a wronged wife. Kenny Voss stood a few feet away, deep in conversation with the town mayor. He glanced up as Marshall approached, his expression a careful mask of concern and disapproval. Ready? Delane asked. Marshall nodded. Let's end this. They moved through the crowd, ignoring the whispers that followed them. Marshall kept his gaze forward, his posture straight. Years in the Marines had taught him how to march into hostile territory without showing fear. Inside courtroom 3, Elira and her attorney were already seated at one of the tables. Marshall and Delane took their places at the other. The gallery behind them filled quickly. All rise for the Honorable Judge Raymond Phelps. Judge Phelps, a stern-faced man in his 60s, took his seat and surveyed the courtroom. I understand we're here on a petition for emergency spousal support in the matter of Kane versus Kane. Ms. Holden, since you filed the petition, you may begin. Elira's attorney, a polished woman in an expensive suit, stood. Thank you, Your Honor. My client, Elira Kane, has been left in a desperate financial situation due to the actions of her husband, Marshall Kane. Without warning or justification, Mr. Kane removed his name from their joint accounts, transferred all funds to accounts in his name only, and ceased providing any financial support to Mrs. Kane. Judge Phelps looked at Marshall. Is this accurate, Mr. Kane? Delane stood. Your Honor, if I may respond on my client's behalf. The judge nodded. My client did remove his name from joint accounts and transfer his personal funds to new accounts. This was done legally and in response to Mrs. Kane's demand that he leave the marital home, which he did. However, we contest the characterization that Mrs. Kane has been left destitute. Mr. Kane continues to operate his business and pay all household bills associated with the marital residence where Mrs. Kane continues to live. Mrs. Kane needs access to funds for daily living expenses, Ms. Holden argued. Mr. Kane's actions amount to financial abuse. Your Honor, Delane said calmly. Before we proceed further, there are some facts the court should be aware of. He opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder. We have evidence that Mrs. Kane has been engaged in a long-term extramarital relationship with Kenneth Voss, a local town councilman. This relationship predates the Kane's marriage and has continued throughout. Murmurs erupted in the gallery. Elira's face drained of color. Furthermore, Delane continued, we have DNA evidence confirming that the Kane's daughter, Bryn, is not Mr. Kane's biological child, but is in fact the daughter of Mr. Voss. The murmurs grew louder. Judge Phelps banged his gavel. Order in the court. Miss Holden was on her feet. Your Honor, these outrageous allegations are irrelevant to the matter at hand. On the contrary, Delane interrupted smoothly. They go directly to the heart of Mrs. Kane's petition. Mrs. Kane is asking for emergency support based on financial need. Yet we have evidence that she has been receiving substantial financial support from Mr. Voss for years. He handed a document to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. This is a copy of a checking account in Mrs. Kane's name at First Regional Bank. As you can see, Mr. Voss has been making monthly deposits of $3,000 for the past 5 years. More murmurs from the gallery. Judge Phelps studied the document, his expression darkening. Additionally, Delane continued, Mrs. Kane owns property that was not disclosed in her financial affidavit. He produced another document. This is the deed to a condominium in Seaside, purchased 4 years ago in Mrs. Kane's maiden name. The property is valued at approximately $800,000. Elira whispered frantically to her attorney, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Your Honor, Ms. Holden said, my client was unaware that these allegations would be raised today. We need time to respond. I'm not finished, Delane said. The most relevant document to today's proceeding is this. He handed another paper to the bailiff. This is a prenuptial agreement signed by both parties prior to their marriage. The agreement clearly states that in the event of dissolution, each party retains their separate property, and neither is entitled to support from the other. Judge Phelps examined the document. Ms. Holden, were you aware of this agreement? Elira's attorney hesitated. Your Honor, my client did mention an agreement, but she believed it to be invalid. It was properly executed before a notary, Delane said. Both parties had independent legal counsel. The agreement is ironclad. Judge Phelps spent several minutes reviewing the documents, then looked up. Based on the evidence presented, I am denying the petition for emergency spousal support. Furthermore, I'm ordering an expedited hearing on the underlying divorce petition. He fixed Elira with a stern gaze. Mrs. Kane, I strongly advise you to be forthcoming about all financial assets in your amended disclosures. Attempting to hide assets is a serious offense in my courtroom. He banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. The gallery erupted in conversation as people rushed to spread the news. Marshall remained seated, watching as Elira conferred urgently with her attorney. Kenny Voss had slipped out a side door, avoiding the crowd. Well done, Marshall said quietly to Delane. This is just the beginning, Delane replied. The divorce will be finalized quickly now. As for the rest, he glanced toward the crowd of onlookers. That's up to you. Marshall nodded. The legal battle was won. The court of public opinion would come next. Marshall's workshop was quiet except for the rhythmic sound of his plane sliding over cherry wood. The familiar motion calmed him, gave him space to think. The door opened, and Gwen entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Thought you could use this, she said, setting 1 cup on his workbench. It's been a hell of a week. Marshall set down his plane and accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. The divorce had been finalized 3 days earlier record time, given the circumstances. Elira had withdrawn all counterclaims after the initial hearing, hoping for a quick, quiet resolution. She wouldn't get it. Have you decided? Gwen asked, perching on a stool. Marshall took a sip of coffee before answering. Yes. He led her to his office and opened his laptop. On the screen was a simple website, ready to go live. The header read, The Truth About Elira Kane and Kenneth Voss. Gwen leaned in to read the text. Marshall, this is direct. It's factual, Marshall corrected. No embellishment. No accusations without evidence. The site contained a straightforward timeline, beginning with Marshall and Elira's meeting and ending with a divorce decree. Each entry was supported by documentation photographs, videos, text messages, financial records. The DNA test results were there. So were the records of Kenny's financial improprieties with town funds. Most damning were the videos of Elira and Kenny together, speaking openly about their relationship, about Bryn's paternity, about their plans to eventually leave their respective spouses once they'd extracted maximum financial benefit. You're sure about this? Gwen asked. Once it's out there, you can't take it back. I'm sure, Marshall said. They've been controlling the narrative for 20 years. Time for the truth. He clicked publish, and the site went live. What now? Gwen asked. Marshall closed the laptop. Now we wait. He didn't have to wait long. By evening, his phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. The website link had been shared hundreds of times across social media. Local news outlets were calling for comments. Former friends were texting apologies for believing Elira's stories. Marshall ignored them all and kept working on his rocking chair. The truth would speak for itself. He didn't need to add commentary. The first person to confront him directly was Marla Kendricks. She stormed into his workshop the following morning, face flushed with anger. How dare you? She demanded. How dare you humiliate Elira like this? Marshall set down his tools and faced her. I didn't humiliate her, Marla. She did that herself. You had no right to air your dirty laundry in public. You mean like when you told everyone I was abusive? When you helped spread lies about me being unstable, dangerous? Marshall's voice remained calm, but his eyes were hard. The difference is what I shared is documented truth. What you shared was malicious fiction. Marla faltered. Alira was my friend. She was upset. She was exposed. Marshall corrected. And so were you. The text messages between you and her, planning how to turn the town against me, those on the site too. Marla paled. You can't prove. I already have, Marshall said. Now, unless you're here to buy something, I have work to do. Marla left without another word. Throughout the day, others came, some to apologize, some to verify details, some just to gawk at the man who had turned the town upside down with his revelations. Marshall treated them all the same, polite but distant, refusing to be drawn into gossip or debate. The facts spoke for themselves. By the end of the week, the impact was clear. Kenny Voss had taken an indefinite leave of absence from the town council after the mayor announced an audit of all financial records. Alira had stopped appearing in public entirely. And Bryn, Marshall hadn't heard from Bryn since their confrontation at the cabin. According to Gwen, who heard it from the university registrar's sister, Bryn had withdrawn from classes and moved out of her dormitory. Her social media accounts had gone dark. On Friday evening, as Marshall was closing up the shop, Gwen appeared with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Thought we could use a proper drink, she said, setting the bottle on his desk. It's been one hell of a week. Marshall found 2 clean glasses and watched as Gwen poured a generous measure into each. They clinked glasses silently and drank. Kenny's wife filed for divorce today, Gwen said after a moment, naming Alira as co-respondent. Marshall nodded, but said nothing. And the audit found at least $60,000 missing from town accounts. The county prosecutor is involved now. Another nod. You won, Gwen said softly. It's all out in the open, just like you wanted. Marshall took another sip of whiskey, feeling the burn down his throat. It wasn't about winning. Then what was it about? Truth, Marshall said simply. Living honestly. Facing reality, not hiding from it. Gwen studied him over the rim of her glass. And now, what comes next for Marshall Kane? Marshall looked around the workshop at the projects in various stages of completion, at the tools his grandfather had taught him to use, at the life he had built with his own hands. Now, he said, I rebuild. Spring came to the forest in subtle waves, first the swelling of buds on the maple trees, then the emergence of trillium on the forest floor, finally the return of birdsong at dawn. Marshall woke each morning before sunrise, built a fire in the wood stove, and sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the world awaken. The cabin had become home again, its simplicity a comfort after years in the too large suburban house with its echoing rooms and carefully curated furniture. Here, everything had a purpose. Nothing was for show. Marshall had expanded the workshop behind the cabin, adding large windows to capture the northern light. He worked there most days, focusing on smaller pieces, now jewelry boxes, chess sets, intricately carved picture frames. Word had spread about the quality of his craftsmanship, and orders came in steadily, many from out-of-state customers who knew nothing of the local scandal. The rhythms of his days had a peaceful predictability. Rise early, work with his hands, take a hike through the woods in the afternoon, return to the quiet of the cabin at dusk. The only disruption to this pattern was Gwen, who appeared every few days with groceries, town news, or sometimes just coffee and conversation. You're getting to be a hermit, she told him one afternoon as she helped him unload lumber from his truck. People are starting to think you've gone full Unabomber up here. Marshall raised an eyebrow. People talk too much. It's a small town, Gwen reminded him. Talk is the primary industry. They carried the lumber to the shed behind the workshop, stacking it carefully to allow for proper air circulation. Marshall had taught Gwen the basics of woodworking over the past few months. She was a quick study, her hands already calloused from years of hardware store work. Speaking of talk, Gwen said, there's a proposition I wanted to run by you. Marshall waited, arranging the cherry boards by length. The high school shop program is being cut next year. Budget issues. Some of us are thinking of starting a community workshop, a place where kids could learn practical skills after school. Woodworking, basic mechanics, maybe some electronics. Good idea, Marshall said. We need instructors, Gwen continued. People who actually know what they're doing, not just well-meaning parents. Marshall straightened up, seeing where this was headed. You want me to teach? Just a couple of afternoons a week, Gwen said. These kids need someone who takes the work seriously. Someone who can show them how to build something real. Marshall was silent for a long moment. The thought of dealing with teenagers, their noise, their distractions, their endless questions made him uneasy. But he remembered his own grandfather's patience in teaching him, the quiet pride he'd felt when he completed his first project under the old man's guidance. I'll think about it, he said finally. Gwen nodded, knowing better than to push. That's all I'm asking. They finished stacking the lumber, then moved to the porch where Marshall had set out 2 glasses and a bottle of bourbon, a ritual they'd established over the months. The evening air was cool, the forest around them deepening toward twilight. How's the shop? Marshall asked, pouring 2 fingers into each glass. Surviving, Gwen said. The big box store on the highway is killing us on price, but we've got loyal customers. People who know the difference between cheap tools and good ones. Marshall nodded. He understood the struggle of small businesses against corporate giants. His own shop had thrived because he offered what mass producers couldn't: quality, customization, craftsmanship. I've been thinking, he said after a while, about expansion. Gwen looked surprised. Marshall rarely discussed future plans. What kind of expansion? Training program, Marshall said. Taking on apprentices, teaching them the trade, then helping them set up their own shops. Like a school, more practical, hands-on, no classrooms, no textbooks, just tools and wood and guidance. Gwen considered this. Where would you find these apprentices? Kids who don't fit the college track. Veterans looking for civilian skills. People who need a fresh start. Marshall sipped his bourbon. People starting from zero. Gwen caught the reference to his words to Bryn. You're thinking about her. Marshall didn't answer directly. Everyone deserves a chance to build something worthwhile. They sat in companionable silence as darkness settled around the cabin. Finally, Gwen stood to leave. Think about the high school program, she said. Those kids could use someone like you. Marshall nodded. I will. After she left, he remained on the porch, listening to the night sounds of the forest. The idea of teaching, of passing on the skills his grandfather had taught him, had been growing in his mind for months. Not out of sentimentality or even generosity, but from a pragmatic recognition that craftsmanship was becoming a lost art, and perhaps, though he wouldn't admit it aloud, from a need to build something more lasting than furniture, to create a legacy that couldn't be taken from him. The next morning, Marshall drove into town for the first time in weeks. The hardware store was quiet when he arrived, just a few customers browsing the aisles. Gwen looked up in surprise as he entered. Marshall, didn't expect to see you today. About the high school program, he said without preamble. I'll do it. 2 afternoons a week, like you said. Gwen's face broke into a smile. That's great. The kids will be lucky to have you. One condition, Marshall added. We focus on troubled kids. The ones everyone else has given up on. Gwen nodded slowly, understanding. The ones starting from zero. Exactly, Marshall said. The ones who need it most. The cafe was bustling with a lunch crowd when Bryn Voss, no longer Bryn Kane, approached the manager's station. Her once designer clothes had been replaced by jeans and a plain t-shirt. Her manicured nails now short and unpolished. I'm here about the server position, she told the manager, a harried-looking woman in her 40s. I filled out an application online. The manager, whose name tag read Diane, glanced at her computer. Bryn Voss? Let me pull that up. She frowned at the screen. Says here you're a student at Portland State. I was, Bryn corrected. I had to withdraw. And no prior work experience? Diane's frown deepened. Not even part-time jobs during high school. Bryn felt her cheeks flush. No, I was focused on academics and extracurriculars. Diane looked unconvinced. Well, we prefer experience, but we're short-staffed. When can you start? Hope flared in Bryn's chest. Immediately. I can work any shift. Let me just run a quick background check and we'll see. Diane's fingers moved across the keyboard, and her expression changed. Oh, I see. Bryn's stomach sank. She knew what was coming. "I'm sorry, but we won't be able to offer you a position at this time," Diane said, her tone noticeably cooler. "Please," Bryn said, lowering her voice. "I really need this job. I'll work hard, I promise." "I'm sure you would," Diane said, not meeting her eyes. "But we're actually looking for someone with more experience. Good luck with your job search." Bryn nodded mechanically and left the cafe, adding it to her mental list of rejections. 14 applications, 14 variations of the same response. Some were more direct than others. "Aren't you that girl from the website scandal? We don't hire liars here." "Kenny Voss's daughter?" "No thanks." The website Marshall had created had gone viral in their small community. Everyone knew the story now, the decades-long affair, the paternity fraud, the financial deception. Kenny Voss faced criminal charges for embezzlement. Elira had moved away, reportedly to stay with relatives in Seattle. And Bryn was on her own, that she'd withdrawn from university when it became clear she couldn't afford the tuition. Her on-campus job had disappeared quickly. The department head had seen the website and decided she wasn't a good fit anymore. Friends stopped returning her calls. Her former boyfriend blocked her number after his parents forbade him from seeing her. Now she lived in a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of Portland, paying rent with the last of her savings. In 3 weeks, she would be broke. Bryn walked to the bus stop, checking her phone out of habit. No messages, no emails, no social media notifications. She deleted her accounts after the 10th abusive comment, the 20th angry message from former friends accusing her of betrayal and dishonesty. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had betrayed and lied. She'd helped destroy a good man's life. Now she was facing the consequences. The bus arrived, and Bryn found a seat near the back. As the city passed by outside the window, she thought of Marshall, of the life he'd given her, the sacrifices he'd made, the unconditional love she'd thrown away. She remembered his words on the cabin porch. "You start from zero. Same as me. Zero." That's exactly where she was now, to her apartment. Bryn found an eviction notice taped to her door. "Late on rent again, final warning." She tore it down and unlocked the door, entering the depressing single room that now constituted her entire world. A mattress on the floor, a milk crate serving as both table and chair, a duffel bag of clothes. She sat on a mattress and opened her laptop, the one thing of value she hadn't sold yet. Out of desperation, she typed "legal name change Oregon" into the search bar. The results showed a process that could be completed for around $300 plus publication fees. Bryn had exactly $342.17 to her name. She could start over, become someone else, someone without the taint of scandal and betrayal hanging over her, someone who might actually get hired. The idea took root, growing stronger as she researched the process. By morning, she'd made her decision. She withdrew $300 from her account, completed the paperwork at the courthouse, and placed the required notice in the newspaper. In 30 days, Bryn Voss would cease to exist. Bryn Kane would be reborn. The irony of taking Marshall's name, the name she'd never actually had a right to, wasn't lost on her. But it felt right somehow. A reminder of what she'd lost, what she needed to atone for. With the process set in motion, Bryn faced her most difficult task yet. She opened her laptop and composed an email. "Marshall, I know I have no right to contact you. I know you owe me nothing, but I want you to hear this from me rather than through town gossip, that I'm changing my name legally to Bryn Kane, not to claim any relationship with you, but as a promise to myself. A promise to live up to the values you try to teach me: honesty, responsibility, integrity, that I know I lost your trust. I want to earn it back, not ask for it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that the lessons you taught are finally taking root, even if it's too late, that I'm starting from zero, just like you said. Building a life based on truth this time." Bryn, she hit send before she could change her mind, then closed the laptop and lay back on her mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling. She didn't expect a response. Didn't deserve one, but 3 days later, an envelope arrived in her mailbox. No return address, no note inside. Just a cashier's check for $5,000 and a slip of paper with an account number at First Regional Bank. Bryn sat on the curb outside her apartment building, staring at the check with tears streaming down her face. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something. A lifeline. A chance. She deposited the check, paid her overdue rent, and enrolled in a certification program for medical coding practical skills that could lead to a practical job. She studied through the night, worked temporary jobs during the day, and slowly began to rebuild. The name change became final on a rainy Tuesday in April. Bryn Kane signed her new name for the first time on a job application for a data entry position at a small medical office outside Portland. The office manager, new to town and unfamiliar with the scandal, hired her based on her certification and evident hunger to work. Bryn threw herself into the job, arriving early, staying late, volunteering for tasks no one else wanted. She lived frugally, saving every penny. The account Marshall had opened for her received regular deposits, never large, never with any communication attached, but enough to help her stay afloat. She didn't waste the opportunity. 3 months into her job, she was promoted to full-time status with benefits. 6 months in, she enrolled in night classes to complete her degree. She found a small apartment closer to work, paid her bills on time, and began the slow process of building a credit history. All the while, she kept track of Marshall through local news and the occasional mention from coworkers who didn't know her connection to him. His mentorship program for troubled teens had gained attention in local papers. His craftsmanship was featured in a regional design magazine. He had rebuilt his life, just as she was trying to rebuild hers 1 year to the day after receiving the check. Bryn made her first repayment a money order for $500 sent to Marshall's shop address. No note, no explanation needed. Just the beginning of balancing the scales. She didn't expect acknowledgement, and none came. But the regular deposits to her account continued, and Bryn understood the unspoken message. This wasn't about money. It was about responsibility. Accountability. Becoming the person you claim to be. Starting from zero and building something true. The town council meeting was standing room only. Marshall sat in the back row beside Gwen, watching as Kenny Voss stood at the podium, his once confident demeanor replaced by nervous agitation. In light of the ongoing investigation, Kenny said, his voice strained, I am resigning from my position on the council, effective immediately. A murmur ran through the crowd. The investigation into Kenny's financial improprieties had expanded beyond the town's recreation budget to include questionable contracts, unexplained expenses, and missing equipment. The state prosecutor's office had become involved, elevating the case from local scandal to potential criminal matter. Mr. Voss, the mayor said from his seat at the council table, the council accepts your resignation. Do you have any further statement? Kenny glanced around the room, his gaze skipping over Marshall. Only that I apologize to the town for any irregularities that may have occurred during my tenure. I maintain that any mistakes were unintentional and bullshit, someone called from the crowd. You stole from us. The mayor banged his gavel. Order, please. Mr. Voss, you may step down. Kenny gathered his papers with shaking hands and hurried from the podium. As he passed Marshall's row, their eyes met briefly. Kenny looked away first. The meeting continued with other business, but the crowd thinned considerably after Kenny's resignation. Marshall and Gwen remained, listening as the council discussed the community workshop program that had been Marshall's focus for the past 6 months. The results speak for themselves, the school superintendent was saying. Attendance rates are up, disciplinary issues are down, and several of the students have even secured part-time jobs using their new skills. And the funding? A council member asked. Private donations cover most expenses, the superintendent explained. Mr. Kane provides the expertise and much of the equipment at no cost to the district. Heads turned toward Marshall, who nodded once in acknowledgement. Well, I think we can all agree this is precisely the kind of program our community needs, the mayor said. I propose we allocate funds to expand it next year. The motion passed unanimously. As the meeting adjourned, several people approached Marshall to shake his hand or offer words of appreciation. He accepted their praise with quiet nods, uncomfortable with the attention but gratified by the program's success. Outside, the night air was crisp with early autumn. Marshall and Gwen walked toward their parked vehicles, discussing the meeting's outcome. "You become a local hero," Gwen observed. "The stern craftsman who mentors troubled youth." Marshall shook his head. "Just teaching skills my grandfather taught me. It's more than that," Gwen insisted. "You're giving these kids purpose, direction, a chance to create something lasting." Before Marshall could respond, a figure stepped out of the shadows beside his truck. Elira. She looked thinner than he remembered, her once perfect appearance now showing signs of strained dark circles under her eyes, lines around her mouth, her designer clothes replaced by simpler attire. "Marshall," she said, her voice uncharacteristically tentative. "Can we talk?" Marshall glanced at Gwen, who raised her eyebrows in silent question. "It's fine," he told her. "I'll call you tomorrow." Gwen nodded and continued to her own car, though Marshall noticed she didn't immediately drive away, keeping watch, making sure he was okay. "What do you want, Elira?" Marshall asked, turning back to his ex-wife. "I heard you're doing well," she said. "The mentorship program, the expansion of your business. I'm happy for you." Marshall waited, knowing there was more. "I'm not doing so well," Elira continued, her voice catching. "Kenny's facing charges. His wife took everything in the divorce. And she trailed off, gesturing vaguely at herself. "I've hit bottom. What do you want?" Marshall repeated. "Alone," Elira said, the word clearly difficult for her. "Just enough to get back on my feet. To start over somewhere new, where people don't know me." Marshall studied her, this woman he'd once loved, once built his life around. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the consequences of her own actions. "No," he said simply. Elira blinked, clearly unprepared for the direct refusal. "Marshall, please. I have nowhere else to turn. I know I hurt you." "This isn't about hurt," Marshall interrupted. "This is about choices and consequences. You chose your path. Now you're facing the consequences. So that's it." Elira's voice hardened, a glimpse of her old self emerging. 20 years together, and you won't even help me when I'm desperate." "We weren't together for 20 years, Marshall corrected. "We shared a house, a bank account, a social circle. But you were with Kenny the entire time. Your choice. You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Elira's tone turned bitter. "Seeing me brought low while you're the town hero. I don't enjoy your suffering," Marshall said. "But I don't feel responsible for alleviating it, either." "What about Bryn?" Elira tried a different angle. "Have you heard from her? Do you know what she's going through because of what you did? Because of what I did?" Marshall raised an eyebrow. "I revealed the truth. You created it. She's your daughter in every way that matters." "No," Marshall said firmly. "She's not, and she never was. That was just another lie you told to me, to her, to yourself." Elira's face crumpled. "Please, Marshall, I'm begging you. Just enough to start over." Marshall looked at her for a long moment, remembering the woman who had walked into his shop all those years ago, who had touched the grain of his work with apparent appreciation, who had seemed to see something in him worth loving. Had any of it been real? It no longer mattered. "I am helping someone start over," he said finally. "Just not you." He unlocked his truck and got in, leaving Elira standing in the parking lot. As he drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror to see Gwen pulling up beside Elira, rolling down her window to speak with her. Even in the dim light, he could see the anger in Gwen's posture, the defensive huddle of Elira's shoulders. Marshall drove to his shop rather than back to the cabin. Inside, he opened his laptop and accessed his online banking. The account he'd established for Bryn showed regular activity deposits and withdrawals, bills paid, small savings accumulating. She was using the opportunity he'd provided, building a life one careful step at a time. Marshall opened another window and navigated to the university's website. With methodical precision, he filled out the donor form for a new scholarship, the Harlow Arts Scholarship, named for Gwen's family, who had supported the town's cultural life for generations. The scholarship would provide full tuition for talented young artists who couldn't afford college. He funded it with a transfer from his business account enough to sustain it for years to come. Under the selection criteria, he specified only that recipients must demonstrate both talent and financial need. No mention of character, no morality clauses. Just opportunity offered without judgment to those starting from zero. The application system would be administered by the university, the recipients anonymous to him. But Marshall had included one specific provision: priority would be given to applicants from their town and surrounding communities. He completed the transaction, closed his laptop, and turned off the shop lights. Tomorrow he would tell Gwen about the scholarship named for her family. She would protest, try to give him credit, but he would insist. This wasn't about recognition. It was about creating something lasting, something that couldn't be corrupted by ego or betrayal. As he drove back to the cabin, Marshall thought about Bryn, not the deceptive girl who had mocked him in his own home, but the young woman now struggling to rebuild her life. He wondered if she would ever apply for the scholarship, if she would recognize the opportunity for what it was. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a chance, a test of character, a way forward from zero. The morning air carried the first hint of winter as Marshall sat on his cabin porch, coffee mug warming his hands. 2 years had passed since the truth had come to light, 2 years of rebuilding, of creating a new life from the ashes of the old. The woodshop behind the cabin had expanded to include a teaching space where he now mentored 6 apprentices, 3 troubled teenagers from local high schools, 2 veterans transitioning to civilian life, and 1 middle-aged woman reinventing herself after a divorce. They came 3 days a week, learning to transform raw lumber into functional beauty. Marshall set his coffee aside and turned his attention to the sculpture taking shape on his workbench. Unlike his usual practical pieces, this was purely artistic, a flowing form carved from a single piece of walnut, suggesting both movement and stillness. He'd been working on it for months, with no client and no deadline. Just a quiet conversation between his hands and the wood. The sound of tires on gravel announced Gwen's arrival. She stepped out of her truck carrying a thermos and a manila envelope. "Morning," she called, climbing the porch steps. Brought fresh coffee and news. Marshall made room for her on the bench. Coffee first. Gwen poured the steaming liquid into his empty mug, then filled one for herself. "Beautiful day," she observed, looking out at the forest. "First frost coming soon, though." Marshall nodded, returning to his carving. They sat in companionable silence for a while, Gwen respecting his concentration. Finally, he set the piece aside and turned to her. "What's the news?" Gwen handed him the envelope. "The Harlow Scholarship Committee met yesterday. They've selected the first recipient." Marshall opened the envelope and scanned the document inside. The recipient's name had been redacted, part of his agreement with the university to keep the selection anonymous. But the brief biography told him everything he needed to know. Female student, 22, returning to complete degree in healthcare administration after financial hardship. Demonstrates exceptional promise and commitment to community service. Currently employed full-time while taking night classes. Resident of Glenwood County, Bryn. It had to be Bryn. Marshall refolded the paper and returned it to the envelope. "Good choice. You don't want to know more about her?" Gwen asked, watching his face carefully. "No need," Marshall said. "The committee made their decision based on merit." "That's enough." Gwen nodded slowly. "Kenny Voss's sentencing is next week. Rumors say he's looking at 5 to 7 years. Consequences," Marshall said simply. "And Alira? Have you heard anything?" Marshall shook his head. After their encounter in the parking lot, Alira had left town. According to local gossip, she'd moved to California to stay with a cousin. Marshall neither knew nor cared if the rumors were true. "They made their choices," he said. "Now they're living with them. Same as me." Gwen sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim of her mug. "You know, most men would have been destroyed by what happened to you, or consumed by bitterness." Marshall picked up the sculpture again, his hands automatically finding the curves in the wood. "My grandfather used to say, there are 2 ways to respond when life burns you down. You can lie in the ashes and mourn what you lost, or you can use the fire to forge something stronger. Is that what you've done? Forge something stronger?" Marshall considered the question, looking out at the forest, at the workshop where his apprentices would soon arrive, at the sculpture taking shape in his hands. "Some things you rebuild," he told Gwen. "Others you let burn so the fire doesn't spread." Gwen smiled, understanding the philosophy that had guided his recovery. Not forgiveness. Marshall was too honest to pretend the betrayal hadn't cut deep, but a refusal to be defined by it, to let it poison his future. "Your apprentices are coming up the drive," Gwen observed, nodding toward the road where several cars had appeared. Marshall set his sculpture aside and stood, preparing to meet them. Before he went, he turned back to Gwen. "Thank them," he said, nodding toward the envelope. "The scholarship committee. Tell them they made the right choice." "I will," Gwen promised. As Marshall walked toward his workshop to greet his students, he felt a quiet sense of completion. Not happiness, exactly, he was too practical for such abstract concepts, but satisfaction. The satisfaction of a craftsman who has built something solid and true. Behind him, the unfinished sculpture sat on the porch, not yet complete, but with its essential form emerging from the raw wood. Like his life. Like Bryn's, perhaps. Unfinished, imperfect, but taking shape with each careful cut, each deliberate choice, starting from zero, building with truth, moving forward one day at a time. That was victory enough.